So good evening. Welcome to the September 26th Planning Commission meeting. And should we call to order?
Commissioner Miranda.
Here.
Commissioner Thorson. Commissioner Strauss. Here. Commissioner Melton. Here. Commissioner Nemerov. Here. Commissioner Hamilton. Here. Commissioner Berube. Here. My apologies. Commissioner Bennett. Here. Chair Olson.
Here. Thank you. So next is approval of the meeting agenda. Were there any edits or an motion to approve?
I move approval of the agenda as submitted.
Thank you. Second? Second, all in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Next on the agenda is approval of the minutes from September 12th. Were there any comments, edits to the minutes? Commissioner Lee.
I think it was just one typo I found on page 3 of 5, middle of the page. Discussion, comments, questions, last bullet. Commissioners asked if the non-conforming setback of the old patio would still needed a variance with the same footprint, and commissioners replied yes. I think that was should be staff. Replied yes. And then on page 4 of 5, under staff presentation 2019 Planning Commission work plan, discussion, comments, and questions. Second bullet, commissioners commented on traffic studies be reviewed by the Transportation Commission, and the Planning Commission receive a memo with input. Actually, I was making a request that we coordinate a work item with the Transportation Commission to jointly review the traffic studies. Can you, I guess that if you can capture that kind of wording, that was the point. Okay, that was it.
Okay, did you understand what? Did you?
Yes, I'll make those changes. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other edits? Is there a motion?
Move approval of the minutes as amended.
Is there a second? All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Thanks. Welcome. So we have one public hearing tonight, and that is a variance request at 6205 Spruce Road. It's a front yard setback variance for a new home. Chris.
Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission, this is a front yard setback variance request for 6205 Spruce Road. The subject property is located on the east side of Spruce Road. It consists of a single-family home. It's 1.5 stories with a tuck-under single-stall garage, and then there's a detached 2-car garage in the front yard area. Spruce Road is a rather narrow road. It is north of Belmore Lane. There are really only 2 other homes that are adjacent to Spruce Road, one to the south, which fronts Belmore Lane, so the side street of that property is along Spruce Road, and then the property to the north fronts Spruce Road. You can see the house that's directly north of the subject property. This is a photograph of the existing home, and this is a tear-down rebuild. This illustrates in yellow the existing footprint of the home and the detached garage, and then the red outlined area indicates the proposed new home, which will be located within the same general area as the existing home. They intend to match the same front yard setback as the existing detached garage with the attached garage piece towards the south, and then the main portion of the home would roughly be in the same location as the existing main home The difference is that the side yard setbacks will increase on both sides. There will be a deeper setback to that north wall, to the main portion of the home, and a much deeper setback for the garage to the south lot line. What they're requesting a variance from is for the front yard setback requirement, which in this particular instance, once the home is removed, the new home has to be backed up within to the lot to match the front yard setback of the home to the north. The home to the south actually fronts Belmore, so it is not included in the average of the two. So this actually was submitted, the plan was submitted for a permit application, so it's been reviewed by the building department, engineering department, water resources, as well as the city forester. It met all of the other requirements of the city when it was reviewed for planning issues. It was caught or indicated that it would need a variance for front yard setback, that they couldn't just simply match the existing nonconforming setback of the structures that are currently on site, that they would have to then move the house back to line up with the home to the north. So this then is the new home as indicated on the lot with the existing home to the north, and again, the home to the south. There's also another newer home that is along Belmore as well that has been recently built. It backs up to the golf course. So these two homes face south with the home to the north also fronting along Spruce Road, as does the subject property. This is the proposed survey of the new home. The lower level plan, the main floor plan. The upper level plan, it's a 2-story home. So this would be the new front elevation. It's a side loading garage, so from the front, this is the side loading garage and what you would see from Spruce. It's well within the height requirement. It's well within the side and rear yard setbacks. It's very well within the lot coverage requirements. So it meets all of the other requirements with the exception of front yard setback. Here are the side elevations. And then this gives you an idea of the existing conditions. The house that's to the north. Now that home was built in 1971. The existing home on the subject property was built in 1937. So by virtue of the fact of where the home to the north was built, that now affects the opportunity of where you are allowed to build on the subject property. And then the house that is down in this corner is actually the side wall of the home that's directly to the south that also fronts along Belmore. So this gives you an idea of the home as it would be inset within the block along Spruce, showing the home to the north as well as the home to the south, and some similar views from each side. So the actual requirement for front yard setback is 169.7 feet. The existing home is 102.8 feet back from the front lot line. So we're talking about very deep front yard setbacks. I believe the assumption was when the building permit was applied for that it was a 30-foot setback. That's what our standard ordinance is in a new undeveloped subdivision. Anybody that may not know our ordinance very well might assume that, but in an established neighborhood, you have to match either the adjacent neighbor, if there's only one other home fronting the street, as in this situation, or average the homes on either side. So in terms of eligibility requirements for the property, this home was built many years before the home that was built to the north that sets up the required setback and any sort of building opportunity for the property. And so the primary issue, does the proposed new home meet the criteria for approval of a variance? Staff does believe the proposal does meet for the following reasons, because the home to be rebuilt at the existing nonconforming setback is closer to the street and will match the existing conditions that are currently there. The proposed home will conform to all other codes, so it does meet all of their requirements, and it, in fact, has been reviewed for permit application for all other departments. And the proposed home design fits the character of the neighborhood. There are other homes that have been rebuilt in the neighborhood. It meets all of the other requirements in terms of height, scale, massing, coverage, and setback. The request meets the criteria for approval of a variance given the following findings. The proposal meets the condition for a variance given that the proposal meets all of the applicable zoning requirements with the exception of the front yard setback, which is merely to match the existing non-conforming setback, and the proposal fits the neighborhood character. Staff does recommend approval and will stand for questions.
Thank you, Chris. Are there questions for staff? Commissioner Lee.
Thank you, Chris. Could you just explain a little more? I think I missed a little bit of the house to the south. How is that one? How is that house setbacks determined? Where does it? Which street does that one have to relate to?
So you're referring to the house that's directly
Yes.
to the south?
That's correct.
They front Belmore Lane. This is their front yard. This is their side street. So if this house were to be redeveloped, they would have to match the front yard setback of the home that's directly to the east. They would then also have to match the front yard setback of the home to the north. So if this home does not receive a variance and it has to be put further back into the lot, that certainly does then affect the opportunity for the home that's directly to the south.
And then if that home that's to the north does have to move back to an alignment with his neighbor, should the house to the south be torn down, the problem now becomes how they match the house to the east. Is that correct?
Well, they would have to match the setback of the house to the east along the south property line, so they'd have to line up with the house to the east.
Mm-hmm.
They also would have to line up with the house to the north. So if this property is required to move back to align with the home to the north, then this property would certainly need a variance.
Right. Okay.
For
That's
rebuilding.
And then this street that it faces, is that a street? That is Spruce
It
Street.
is.
That's
It's
still
very
Spruce
narrow.
Street. Okay. And the main entrance to both houses, actually all three houses, is off Spruce Street right now, except for the house on the corner. Is that right?
All of them have driveway access off of Spruce, including the home to the south. Their garage loads off of Spruce, the
Right.
house to the south.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for Chris? I just have a quick one. If we required them to meet the setback, we would be removing a lot more trees, is that correct?
Yes.
And a lot more impervious coverage.
Yes, there would be a larger driveway
Yeah.
extension to the
Okay.
house.
All right, thank you. Okay, would the applicant like to speak? You don't have to, but you can come up and... No? Okay.
We're very excited to be there.
Okay, great. Thank you. So it's also a public hearing. Is there anyone from the public who'd like to speak? Here. No?
I move to close the public hearing.
Is there a second? Second? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Motion carries. So bringing it back to the Planning Commission. Any other comments? Commissioner Bennett.
I just have a comment. I mean, the reason this is before us is a product of circumstance. The house once was conforming because of a neighboring property being built. It's non-conforming. They're doing their best to match the existing footprint of the house, and the difficulty for them to actually abide by our setbacks is just super impractical and kind of ruins a lot of the things you brought up. And for that reason, I fully support this. It's a beautiful addition.
Commissioner Strauss.
Yeah, yes, I thought the 2.1 was just the disruption of moving it back, the loss of trees, which they mentioned, and then would create an impossible situation for the lot to the south. I mean, all of a sudden, it almost becomes unbuildable, because of so this certainly makes a lot of sense.
Commissioner Lee.
I understand the idea of trying to match the setback of your adjacent neighbors. Most applications that pertains to a longer street where houses are much more similar, typically a very straight street. I think in this case, we would be trying to enforce something that doesn't quite fit with this particular parcel. There does seem to be sufficient land to rebuild the house back further, but then in considering the house that it's trying to match, that was by circumstance as well. It wasn't any result of some linear planning that permeates throughout the neighborhood. So I think I could support this variance request. I also appreciate the fact that they didn't make it any more difficult by trying to go either in front of where the existing garage is or a little wider than the existing house. That makes it, I think from a resident standpoint, easier to visualize when you realize that the house is essentially going to stay on the same footprint. So I do appreciate the fact too that the size of it and the design all appear to match very well within the neighborhood.
Commissioner Nemiroff.
Yeah, I think the fellow commissioners' comments are quite good. I also want to just point out that there was a very well-written and persuasive letter from a neighbor in favor of this application. Very well-reasoned letter about the purpose behind the ordinances and what they're intending to protect in our neighborhoods, but that application of the letter of the ordinance in this situation could actually result in the opposite of what it's trying to protect, and that the variance is more in spirit with the goal of the ordinance. So I thought that was just an outstanding letter, and all the more helped me support this variance.
Any other comments or a motion? Go for it.
I move approval of the variance, subject to the conditions and findings outlined in the staff memo.
Okay. Second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Enjoy. It's nice, yeah. We'll get some bigger ones for you. Yeah. All right, so next is the community comment. So during this period, you can present a comment that we haven't addressed on the agenda. I'm just repeating what you did more beautifully earlier, but are you here for community comment? No? Okay. All right.
I move to close community comment.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Moving on. So reports and recommendations. We have the Solar Energy Systems Ordinance amendments. Is that why you're here? Yay.
So presenting this evening, as we get ready to set up, we have Tara Brown, who is our sustainability coordinator. Been with the city, maybe a couple of years now, 2 years, yeah. And Casey Casella, who's the city management fellow. So take it away, Casey.
Thank you. Good evening, commissioners and chair. I'm Casey, and the topic today is solar energy systems ordinance amendments proposed, and some background on SolSmart and why the ordinance recommendations are proposed today. So again, Tara Brown is in the staff with us. Thank you, Tara, for coming. And she has really championed solar development within the city. And then Tara provided me with the opportunity to work on coordinating actions for the SolSmart application. So again, I'm Casey, and I'm the city management fellow. So a little background on the SolSmart program. SolSmart is funded by the U.S. Department of Energy Solar Technologies Division, but is led by the International City-County Manager Association in partnership with the Solar Foundation. And essentially their goal is to streamline zoning development and inspection requirements to remove barriers for solar development in communities. Over 200 municipalities nationwide are SolSmart designated designated communities. In Minnesota, as you can see on the map, some bigger ones are Duluth, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Rochester, and other smaller cities and counties throughout the state. And these designations signify to businesses and residents that your community is open and appreciative of solar development. So Edina has been a trailblazer for solar development. In 2012, they were actually one of the first to install solar panels on the City Hall, which are right above us. Utilizing solar is a great way to achieve our community's goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions 30% by 2025. And this SolSmart application helps the city remove barriers for businesses, individuals, and cities to utilize solar. So a little bit about the designation in the application. So the SolSmart application is based on recommended actions to reduce barriers in your community for solar energy. There's a variety of options for actions that you can take, so you can kind of tailor it to your community and what you feel you want to do. Some of the actions that staff has already taken, we've created a solar statement and published our intent to become a SolSmart community. One of the bigger ones is we worked with building and we created a permitting and inspection checklist for solar for residential and commercial solar. That's in the middle there, so that's live online. And then we also created a web page of resources for individual solar, so residents can go see what are the next steps if I'm interested in installing solar on my rooftop. So by completing these certain lists of actions, SolSmart designates a community a bronze, silver, or gold star that you are, and they're dependent on the certain types of actions you take. And current staff goal is to be gold certified by the end of 2018 for Edina. So today, SolSmart has 8 kind of sections in their application, and today we're talking about the planning, zoning, and development section. So there's A, B, and C here in that PZD, the planning, zoning, and development section. So for part 1A, it is to review the zoning requirements that intentionally or unintentionally prohibit solar PV development. So that is going to be the memo that's in your packet. SolSmart advisors actually reviewed Edina's code for us. We were very grateful to have their expertise on that. So that memo provides recommendations and the positive impact of changing those things and following those recommendations in order to reduce barriers to solar in our community. So that's going to be on page 41 through 45 of your packet. 1B is the focus of today. We are formally presenting the memo to you all. And then 1C is going to be that last part in your item in the packet, which is that proposed languages for changing the zoning code based on that memo on page 41 through 45. So these are the different sections that staff proposed to change in the zoning ordinance. If you have questions on them, I can take those. Otherwise, what we're really here for today is questions and discussions, and I am happy to take those at this time.
Okay, just a quick question. Sorry. I'm jumping in here so this is something that the city is pursuing. Can I run through the impetus of this again? What are we getting with this?
Yeah, no worries. So this
that I'm not saying I'm not for it, but I just...
No worries. So this is a part of the SolSmart application, right? So these are the zoning actions in the application. And in order to be designated as a community, we have to check off a certain amount of these. So we've already done that 1A. Today we'll be checking off that 1B. And then what we're going to start working on as staff is getting these proposed changes proposed. And it starts with you all in the Planning Commission. Does that make a little more sense?
Right. So with the designation, though, what do you get with that other than being able to say we have it?
All eternal glory. No, I'm just kidding. It really helps advertise our community to businesses, to residents, that we're open to solar, and that we're a sustainable community. I think they also provide a lot of resources, and they're connected with a lot of associations that help build solar essentially in our community. And that's that goal of reducing greenhouse gases.
Okay, does it, sorry, I'll give you guys a chance this 1 second. But does it also open up the opportunity for like grants, or do they have access to funding to help support it, or?
You know, I am not sure about grants. I'm going to have our sustainability coordinator talk about that.
Okay.
They don't have grants specifically under the SolSmart, but it does showcase for other grant potentials, whether it's through innovation testing with NREL or USD and Innovation Fund grants. This shows that we've done our due diligence to see what barriers are we intentionally or unintentionally creating, ensuring that there's a real streamlined process. I think one of the biggest impacts we saw in the impetus to having this is really looking at our permitting and our checklist around permitting and inspection. And we've really streamlined that, because what we find is some people want to do this, but they start to get caught up on all the process, and this lays out the process for them ahead of time so they can really understand the steps they need to take and the costs they may or may not incur to make the right decision for themselves.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hey, Commissioner Bennett, or I'll just go down the line.
I love what you guys are doing. This is cool stuff. Couple things that just come to mind. Now that, let's say this goes forward and we do become a SolSmart community, are you aware of the education piece that the city would then maybe provide to residents, advertising that, as well as, because, yeah, it's easier to do, but a big piece of this is the grant piece, which is obviously separate to SolSmart, but I think it was kind of like when Commissioner Miranda was talking about becoming a bicycling community. Really, you need to provide a lot of the education too and awareness. So just because we're SolSmart, I mean, maybe that helps more on the commercial side, but does the city have, or a vision for a plan to like communicate that to residents?
Yes, at a high level, we plan to currently utilize what we've been doing, for example, with the electricity action plan. So the biggest thing is, one, at events. We, on October 1st, on Monday, we will be talking about the solar array that's being installed at Public Works. So here, based on your guys' feedback, this is one piece we'd speak about it. And not that we're SolSmart certified, but that we're seeking that. The other ones is through About Town education, because we see that, and then in the articles that are put into the Sun Current, those are places that people read, as well as our website education. We have discussed other ideas. For example, there are residents that have done this themselves, put solar on their roof. They are very interested in helping others. So do we have solar mentors? We're still working that out. That is one option, as well as there are different commercial groups that are willing to set up meetings and answer questions. That isn't fully baked just because we don't want to support one business over another. So we're trying to still figure out how we might present those meetings in a fair way.
I mean, this seems like a great step forward too, and especially with the checklist, making it easier for people to get permits and inspection. So it's nice to know what the next steps are, because probably most residents don't know what SolSmart is, so then it'd require them to Google what that is, or if there was education behind it. So what does that allow me to do? And then the next piece is obviously the financing, but thank you.
Commissioner Hamilton, did you have something?
There's a couple of things that, certainly I'm a supporter. In fact, one of the things I'd be curious about would be wind generators next, and how it is we set up zoning so that that's possible. But two things. The snow blockage that you end up with in Minnesota prevents you many times from having a low slope solar application, so you end up with a more vertical and much more visible application. So be aware that that's what you're going to see. That earlier photo that we saw, I will bet you is not from a northern climate.
That's actually one that was permitted this year and inspected within the city of Edina. Yeah.
Okay. Because frequently what you're going to see is those are going to be on arms to get them more vertical, not necessarily for sun angle, but because unless you want to go up and clear the snow off of them, they're not going to work. So that's a piece. And any issue about future generations, that new Tesla shingle that's out, that looks like a shingle and isn't raised up above the roof, because this is a maintenance problem for the re-roofing and an expense.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
That Tesla, maybe there wasn't one there, but there kind of is, that maybe at least thinking about in the future limiting it to the application of the Tesla shingle instead of the solar array that's like this. It looks like a shingle. It's expensive, but it's also not visible.
Got it. So looking at future considerations about how future technologies can allow this to look more like the roof, and then limiting the
maintenance problem that these will
definition
create.
of it.
Commissioner Nemrov, were you done, John?
That's all I can think of.
Okay.
So my questions are probably going to sound significantly like follow-ups to the ones that have already occurred. To follow the chair's questions, tonight is this a discussion about the desirability of changing our zoning to be more accommodative to solar, or is it to actually, by the way, you gave us a really nice presentation with here's more permissive, here's less permissive options. I really appreciate that. And you gave good kind of, here's why you might do A, here's why, I really appreciate it. Is the purpose of tonight's meeting that you'd like us to pick from those options, or is this more of just a discussion in support of the end goal, and at a later date we'll discuss how to draft the ordinances?
So I could jump in on that one. So we've drafted the ordinance. So right now, the city does allow, we define them just as energy collection systems. This ordinance that's before you, and it's just a draft form, provides the more detail, provides the definition. So if, we'll get the feedback from the Planning Commission, being that it is a zoning ordinance amendment, we would be required to hold a public hearing and make a formal recommendation to the City Council on the ordinance itself.
So how does this ordinance map to the options that were presented? It looks kind of skinnier than some of the things. Are you all good with that, or?
Yeah, it's not getting into that specific detail. It's really, they're allowed now. The ordinance provides some exceptions, like building coverage, provides the additional definition. Or I should take that back in saying that we would exclude these from building coverage, unless it's on the roof, of course, then the building is, would still be included within a building coverage.
Lot coverage?
Lot coverage, correct.
Okay. And, all right, so all of you are good with the ordinance, even though it doesn't have all the detail that was in some of the exam. Okay. Following up on your comment, Carrie, would the solar array still be subject to height limitations?
That's a good question.
Yeah, not too tall.
Yeah, we'd have to look at our specific, I would say it should. So we should that's good feedback. So we would take a look at our height definition and include some language that would include these structures within the height.
I think we probably would need to. I think the public feedback, if we didn't, once one or two went up, I think
Right.
you'd be turning your phone off for a couple weeks. And then going back to Commissioner Bennett's conversation about education, I think that's very important. I talked about it a little bit. There's a lot of information on the internet now, pro and con, about the use of getting solar in your house, or signing up for some kind of solar program through the electric company, joining a community solar garden, getting things that way. And it's actually really confusing, and it's much more confusing for a consumer in particular than it is to just call the electric company and have power started. And I think there's a lot of variety, a wide delta between the pros and the cons in terms of like how affordable, whether it's a good investment for you or it's a bad investment. I suspect that a lot of people get into solar primarily, the impetus is because they think it's a good thing to do for the world, which is you know, a great place to start. But then I think they I think they probably can get confused about the financial ramifications and other things like how to select good materials and select a good contractor. Is there anything the city can do on those things to help people figure out whether, get a better idea of their financial impact of this decision and how to make selections?
I think that's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that up. On our solar page, so it's the edinamn.gov/solar, we named it individual solar, but on there it provides a bunch of resources that were sent to us through our SolSmart advisor, and it talks about that financial aspect, that how do I pick which company to go with aspect, and just some general overviews. We have a solar heat map on there so you can see like your roof of your house and how much heat you would get from it. And you can actually use a calculator to generate how much you can save by installing solar. So there's a lot of resources on our website just for the city in general. And SolSmart as a program also provides a lot of resources. So if you need anything specific, we can reach out to them. You can reach out to them. Anything else?
No, I guess I would just say that sounds great. And I would just ensure that people, that's really public. You were talking about a publicity. I mean, because I think that's where people have buyer's remorse and that kind of stuff. So that sounds like you're on a great track. Thank you.
I was just curious, what are the financial incentives? Are there any financial incentives for installing solar panels?
Not from the city at this time. There are some tax breaks for individuals or for commercial. And I believe if you look into Excel, if you feed them some of the energy, you could get some bill credits.
Yes, thanks. Under the ordinance section with the highlighted, stuff, the last line there, solar energy systems may generate energy in excess of the energy requirements of the property and be sold back. I see these. Do you see that, what I'm talking about? I mean, this idea of selling it back to a public utility. Does that exist with solar operations now? I mean, would this cause perhaps a property to overbuild a system, in fact, to create a situation where there were excess? I mean, maybe that's okay. It's just, but that's currently, that exists, that ability is sort of have it go back into the public, in the grid?
And I would have to check, but I believe they only get bill credits for 120% of what they would usually use.
Okay, okay.
So
but
20% more.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Two questions specific to land use. First of all, I think we do need to consider whether you can put these in your front yard. As green and as trendy as they are, I think they are generally an eyesore, and I think that's an imposition on your neighbors if you were to be allowed to put these in your front yard. In a similar vein, I think allowing these to encroach into our very modest setbacks, thinking of a lot of, not the neighborhoods we just saw, but some of the neighborhoods more like the one I live in, where houses are right on the setbacks because you have 60-foot and shorter lots. I would not be supportive of allowing those to encroach in the setbacks either. But I think the lot coverage exemption makes sense. Other than that.
So if I could address, so the section 36-1269, the existing ordinance talks to setback requirements for these facilities. So they would have to meet required front, side, and rear setbacks.
Okay, so Carrie, reading that then, we would not expect to see them in the front yard, but they could. It sounds like here I was assuming they were always on roofs. Not necessarily. There could be an array on the ground, as long as it didn't exceed
There could be.
lot coverage. Or
Correct.
maybe we'll exempt them. Okay. So similar to when we were having a discussion about accessory dwelling units, I always like to kind of just think about how this would be applied. So if for example, let's say there was a tear down, and they are going to build a new house and want to put solar panels up on the roof. In order to do that, they've decided, well, this tree is in the way, and therefore I would like to remove this tree for my solar panels. I think we have some general rules about how many trees can be removed and where, and then those that are removed need to be replaced. But is this something that we would consider, that potentially large trees are being removed because we want to get a little more solar coverage or solar exposure? Have you ever come across anything like that, where that starts to impact new design?
We have not looked into any research of how another city has applied these ordinance changes and how it has affected their tree canopy.
But it is conceivable that something like if a homeowner might
Yes.
want to do that with planning solar in mind. So I
As
think
long
that's
as-
just something as a commission, we have to realize that might start factoring in some of the design decisions.
As long as it makes within the current tree ordinance.
Right. Yep. What was the other thing? Okay, I think that was the only comment I had.
Chip in it.
Just to follow up on the land use, a lot of these solar arrays have moved to the company I work for. We do a lot of support to the design of these foundation-wise big solar farms on the ground. And certainly I see communities where that makes sense, but Edina, I don't know many cases where that seems appropriate. So is there a reason that's in there? Is that just guidance from SolSmart to have less limitations? And if so, that is one thing I'd consider removing. I'm trying to think of any example where in the majority of Edina that would be an appropriate use of your land that is not a nuisance to your neighbors.
The way that we've seen it, not necessarily here, but in others or things that have come through, is more of roofing for a patio, like in the back or on top of a commercial building, where there might be a patio and they use the solar as a roof, and then that solar.
Yeah, I understand more on the commercial applications. Yeah, and that makes sense, but yeah, then maybe there's just I don't know, that it seems like you're opening Pandora's box for some interesting situations that if they conform, that nothing would even come to us, and someone could have a whole array along the side of their yard, and as much as I support the thought of that really changes the character of some areas, and probably to the negative, because once that's in, that's not like a fence you can pull down. That's pretty expensive and almost permanent. So just a thought.
So Jimmy, just to back up, so you're saying, or what are you suggesting, to not allow or include?
I don't like, I'm just, unless someone can convince me with a situation, everything I picture in Edina, unless you have a huge property that no one sees, someone doing that really changes the look of that property, maybe, in perpetuity.
So
And I
on
think that-
ground or on the roof?
On the
anywhere?
ground specifically.
Just on the ground, okay.
So one way that you might want to think about a regulation around that would be to exclude the exception of the building coverage, to include it specifically in a building coverage requirement. That would prevent someone from putting them all over their entire, well, they have to meet setbacks, but filling their entire backyard would be certainly possible.
Does the installation of these panels and the associated electrical equipment create safety hazards, and are there sufficient regulations to make sure that harm doesn't occur?
The electricity code is done by the state and permitted and inspected by the state. And solar PVs are within the current code.
I did have one more question, I just couldn't remember it. Do you see this as primarily being taken advantage of initially by commercial or residential?
So the definitions or?
No, if the city were to move ahead and now start the education process, who do you think would be most likely to step up initially to get involved and start doing some of this?
I would think it's just more of the same, which we're seeing both commercial and residential.
I could see how, I don't know if for resale value, whether there will be some feeling about buying a house that has solar panels or maintaining it as a negative. I don't know. But again, that's up to the individual homeowner. I'm just curious whether there might be initially a bit of a lag on the residential side, more likely to be seen on our commercial projects until there's a greater acceptance. Maybe seeing it more commonly in certain areas of Edina, maybe not so much in country club. I don't know.
Have one follow-up question too on the excess energy. So it says, if it is to be sold back to a public utility in accordance with the law, what law are we talking about?
I don't have the specific law. We can look that up and come back to you, but this is all regulated by the Public Utilities Commission.
By the what?
The PUC, the Public Utilities Commission.
Okay. Now, because I know that Rochester, we were working on solar panels for their bus facility, and they were having issues with their public utilities district, or whatever you call it, with not allowing them the excess to be able to come back to be used. I mean, do we see any of those issues? Do you know about that?
A lot of the practicality of this, once, if we make it easy for people, a lot of it comes down to that finance piece, and a lot of that is wrapped up into the public utilities as well as other policies that are in place. And so net metering right now allows for people to sell back to those public utilities. And for that reason, primarily, when people are installing these, they're not incorporating a storage system like a battery or anything. There's a huge expense to those. And so people tend to just install it and there's no storage, and they're selling their energy back during the day. So, if things like that were to change, people would have to modify their systems, but most of the time that these are installed, there's room for modifications. But it's just wrapping your head around the financial piece is just where I feel like there's a huge educational opportunity. Once we say, hey, we're a SolSmart community, people are like, oh, maybe I'll consider it now. And so we should make it abundantly clear and easy for people to be like, oh, this is a practical move for me. I don't know if that helps answer your question, but I think that's the law that might be referred to.
I might suggest changing the word "the law" to "applicable law." Or applicable laws. Not to short circuit the policy discussion that you were having about selling the energy back. I personally would not get in the way of that, because that's kind of how the solar garden works right now. People are, in a sense, selling back their energy.
It's a great thing. Sometimes I just think the public utilities aren't the easiest sometimes to work with. I've just heard some bad stories. Okay. So do we need to kind of summarize our thoughts? Or?
I just had a question.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
When people sell back the energy, the excess energy, where does that go to? Does that go to the public utilities then?
Yeah, it goes on the distribution line as in
Okay.
redistributed.
And I don't know if this is applicable, but I know there's an initiative at Edina High School with the Project Earth community to start looking at solar panels for the roof of Edina High School, and I'm not sure. You were talking about the large arrays. Would that limit the ability for Edina, the building, Edina High School to, no? Okay, thank you. Single family, okay, thank you.
So are we good? Do you?
Yeah, I
everyone
think just to summarize, I heard really look at how we are educating the consumer and helping them inform, because it is their decision and there isn't one right answer for everyone. It depends on what your needs are, what your applicability is to make those different decisions, but ensuring we're making it easy and clear for people. Really look at the setbacks or installation beyond the roof, because how that could maybe look in the future, as we don't really see the application right now looking really hairy, but it could be in the future. So really taking that into consideration, as well as a few word adjustments to ensure that the applicable laws apply.
And just the height.
And the height.
The lot
Thank you.
coverage. So I
And the
agree. I
lot
think we should
coverage.
remove that as an exemption.
Yeah, I think it would be, we would add another section to the ordinance here that would address it within our building height regulations.
Renee, may I add something? I want to thank Tara and Casey, because this has forced the planning department to really look at our current zoning ordinance, and I don't know if you really picked up on the fact that we have a one-sentence ordinance right now that addresses solar and wind energy. So it really then forces us to take a look, recalibrate. I think it's really a good time to do that, and I really appreciate them bringing it to us.
And thank you to the planning staff. They've been a great help on this. And thank you all for your comments and discussion. Really appreciate that today. And I'm going to end with my invitation. So next Monday is the opening of the Public Works Solar Community Garden. It's a launch event, and you can RSVP online. That is all. Thank you.
I'm sorry, what?
Ask where that is.
Oh, it's at the Public Works, right?
Correct. It is at the Public Works building, and
Yeah.
there'll be a presentation, some opportunities to ask questions, and then there'll be small group tours of the rooftop with the panels.
Yeah, so it's like in the. I'm sorry, what?
It's the Public Works garage.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you so much. Okay, so the next is to discuss our 2019 Planning Commission work plan.
Thank you, Chair, members of the Commission. So before you is our next draft of the 2019 work plan. I went back and watched the last meeting and tried to incorporate what you all had discussed, and I think I've captured everything. But just to go through the entire plan, so our biggest ongoing responsibility, of course, is reviewing all the land use requests that come before the Planning Commission and making our recommendations to the City Council. And then, of course, the comprehensive plan update. We need to finish that up, and then everything that results from that, zoning ordinance changes, et cetera. And then we do have the list of zoning ordinance amendments in addition to what is the result of the comprehensive plan. So the things that we've talked about include the impervious surface regulation, that basement requirement for single-family homes. Should we or shouldn't we have that? The 1-foot rule, take another look at that. The 2-car garage requirement, we've discussed that here many times. Should we require 1, 2, 0, not have a requirement? Study that. And then consideration of allowing single-family homes in the R2 district, and then allowing duplexes within the R1 district. So to have that discussion and consider some changes there. Then I added, we've had this discussion with the Transportation Commission about, is there a role for them in our development review process in providing comments on the traffic study? The only concern that staff would have, of course, is that 60-day rule. How could we fit them in? So we would, this is a Transportation Commission is on their work plan as well. So I would envision that as at least starting out with some kind of a work session and discussing how that might look. So with that, I would recommend that you, if there's any edits or changes, otherwise I would recommend that we approve our work plan and forward this then on to the City Council. At the next City Council meeting, that's when the chair is asked to come in, and the chair of each commission, and go through the work plan. So that would occur next Tuesday.
Nemiroff?
Thanks, and I'm sorry that I wasn't able to attend the last meeting. I have a variety of suggestions and comments on this that I'd like to at least offer up. Let's see, going through in order. For zoning ordinance amendments that I'd suggest that we consider reviewing, or just issues that I suggest we consider reviewing in addition to the ones here. Lot coverage requirement, I think that's come up from time to time where we've discussed. Is there a total amount of impervious surface that we should have? I think that's something that we should review and discuss. I'd recommend that.
That's in there now.
Well, I see grading and drainage.
It's establishing the impervious surface regulation.
Is that total, like we had an issue a few months ago where it was unclear whether you could go above, say, 30% impervious surface on the total lot.
We don't have an impervious surface requirement. We just have a building coverage requirement.
Yeah.
So this would be in addition to that.
Yeah, I suggest that we at least look into whether that's useful.
Yeah, I think that's on there. That's the same thing. I got a little confused too because it's impervious, but it's lot coverage. But I think it's the same thing. We're talking the same thing. So it's on there already. We're going to study.
So this would include the amount of impervious surface on the lot. Okay, excellent. That's not on my list to add then. Other comments I have for that, I suggest that we should consider reviewing the tree ordinance and the purposes and whether we want to update that. I think that more trees are being removed than were expected at the time that ordinance was proposed. So I suggest that we at least review that for determining whether we want to change it or keep it. Another item that I suggest reviewing, and I think we're going to have to at some point, is the whole idea of give to get. I think the Edina as a city is in like version 1.0 of give to get, where there's just these ideas of things we'll give to a developer in exchange for things we're going to get, but I don't think that we have fulsome, robust processes and procedures for it or transparency. I think there are a lot of other communities, such as Montgomery County, Maryland, is a role model for zoning ordinances in this area. Gwinnett County, Georgia, has ordinances, and I think we need to look at all these things regarding give to get. So it's not just you're giving me this, okay, you can have a tower kind of thing. You're putting in sidewalks. I think we need to do a more balanced assessment of give to get, and I'd recommend that the Planning Commission should start the process on that. I think at some point, I'll stop if you want to comment on that.
Yeah,
I'll pause.
I know you mentioned when you brought that up in the past too, to add some sort of financial component idea.
I don't know if that helps it or, the process of doing that, but I think that it made it more tangible for certain situations. I don't know how practical that is for everyone, but at least helps quantify the give to get, although some of it's just discretionary.
Yeah. Well, there's I don't want to get too legal, but there are risks in being discretionary too, though. But just something to think about. Another thing to think about, and I have comments on a couple items on here. Is I think at some point we should have we as a city should have a policy where we're reviewing what happens when people come before us for variances or subdivisions, when for all intents and purposes it sure seems like they're doing this so they can sell their property for greater value as opposed to using the property. And I think we should look at that. And I've reviewed the concept with a couple of attorneys, one a retired constitutional law attorney, another a professor at the U of M, And the opinion I got was that you can differentiate your treatment and your expectations from those two groups. People that are remodeling or getting a variance or subdivision for purposes of, hey, I want to live in Edina and I just want to, my lifestyle's changed, I want a different home, versus, oh, you know, I have this property and if I subdivide it or get a variance, I can sell it for a lot more money. And I suggest that's something that we should take a look at, because I think it's an issue I think that comes up, and I think that some of us really struggle with those. And I think if we had a more formal way of dealing with it, we could get more comfortable with the variance if we knew there was something different coming out of it.
It's an affordable housing issue.
It is. Among other, yeah, it is an affordable housing issue. A couple other things that I just like to suggest everyone to think about. On the Transportation Commission and input on transportation-related issues, I think that's a good discussion. I would characterize it a little differently than how it's written here. I would suggest that our initiative isn't to discuss with the Transportation Commission the possibility of their doing it, but that we should also have an independent consideration of the pros and cons of doing it. The way it's kind of written here, it sounds like we just have a conversation with them, and once we work out the process, it's done. I think that we need to do a little more thorough vetting of the pros and cons also of that. And so I would have some part of, and review the pros and cons or something, or review the benefits and disadvantages. And then finally...
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
Are you saying pros and cons of having them do the review? Or?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And contribute to our review of a project.
I think that's in that, in that I read it that way.
Okay.
Isn't it?
I would just write it a little differently. And then finally, the area study for the Cahill Industrial Park. I get it. Personally, I'd rather wait a year before we took on another area study or small area plan. I really would just like to finish the comp plan stuff. I mean, we really bit off a lot, and this is something we can always do. And if it were me, I'm totally comfortable being outvoted on this, but I'd rather we pushed it off a year and just digested all the other comp plan stuff we did and use next year as a let's clean up our house kind of stuff. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for your patience in listening to me.
Can I comment to that, the one you just said about Cahill? I think, I understand what you're saying, but also I know that's why we're kind of in the predicament we are, because we had these small area plans identified before and we pushed it off, it seems like, right? And then we had all the development right there. So I'd say as long as if we have the ability, or if people do want to volunteer, I'd say we keep going. So we have something in place, because we'll go.
I think you're right. Having been so involved with that small area plan, we've sort of raised expectations. There's discussion, and I know people have talked about it, from outside, and so there is some anticipation for it. So it's been brought up, it's out there, there is a little momentum for it. I certainly don't see why it doesn't get, we get to it when we get to it, but I think it needs to be on, maybe not quite the back burner.
Also, I just want to clarify, I think just by putting it on our work plan doesn't necessarily mean we're going to do it. Is that right, Carrie? It can get carried over the next year. There may not be funding.
Yes, precisely. So this is a pretty ambitious work plan, but I would agree that we should have it on here because it is one, it's one of those known implementation steps that's going to come out of the comp plans. Note that I've checked the funds not available right now. So just having it on here and noting that, the city council will see, okay, this is something we need to do. We should think about funding, and maybe it gets funded for next year.
Well, I really like everything you guys said. I like if it's an expectation that we're going to do it at one point, but this isn't a commitment that we're doing it next year, that there's some things that happen, but this is a way to make sure that it's on our work to get done someday, and that this holds us accountable to do it at some point. I withdraw that suggestion then, so thank you.
I think we've benefited greatly from Mick Johnson's input on many of the projects in the last year. And I would like to see a way that we could formalize that input, whether it's from Mick or from a design review, because as we know sometimes in the Planning Commission, we don't even see some projects, and people stop you in the grocery store and say, how did that ugly thing ever get built? And you say, well, it fit the zoning. We had nothing to say about it. It seems like Edina is a mature city that can afford to suggest that there are more acceptable ways to do work. The simple way is put Mick Johnson on retainer in perpetuity, but there may be another way to do that.
Are you suggesting then for any development review, even that doesn't come in front of the Planning Commission or Council?
I'm suggesting that whether that will sell or not, I rather doubt.
Exploring that.
But I would like to at least explore it and a process to get there, so that it's A, legal, and B, fair and acceptable. But I think we have all seen some projects presented to us that we've thought, gracious sakes, folks, we could do better than that. But we can't even weigh in on it because we don't have that purview.
Is this excluding
To piggyback off on that, I think in some ways, maybe it's not necessarily Mick Johnson, a person, but maybe what we really need to look at are some design standards. And I will just leave it at that, because I know communities do have that. And we have been reluctant as a planning commission to really go there because we don't have any guidelines for it. But I'd say it probably would be wise to look into it. How do communities do that and guide for some type of standard? And I think we would probably learn quite a bit on that. So it's more to address it from the design realm.
I'll buy that last part, but instead of standard, I would say design quality. Standard seems to suggest that you'll have a greater than 812 pitch and...
Just add one or two things. First of all, when people ask me in the grocery store how'd that get built, how'd the Planning Commission approve it, I always say, well, that was approved before John Hamilton joined the Planning Commission. That's what I tell people. But the other thing I'd suggest is I do like the idea of some kind of body that reviews it. I'm not an architect like John and Susan. My layperson observation is that that sometimes gets done better when there are communities that have good design architecture talent in the community that can help give you an input on how to put such a thing together. And so one of the things that I've always, I probably droned on about this before, but Edina has a lot of talented people. So that might be an area where we could at least get a spark from some residents to help us put such a thing together that's kind of a review system, I guess I would call it now, before saying what it would be. And if we can get some kind of volunteer to leverage, I think that could be helpful.
Yeah, if I could address a few of those things and how we might accomplish that. I think as far as discussions on the design guidelines, some of those things are mentioned in the experience guidelines. So just our statement in here that says recommendations that come out of the comprehensive plan that we look at, it would be covered there. So I think it's something we're probably going to talk about as part of the comprehensive plan. In terms of that give to get, I would recommend that under the zoning ordinance amendment, we look at amending our PUD ordinance to talk about the give to get. I think that's the place in the zoning ordinance where we want to get specific on what we're looking for. Right now, as you recall, it's very general, big picture aspirations. That would be the place in the zoning ordinance that we dive down into to put specific requirements in terms of how we're going to get that give to get.
Carrie,
So I would
just
suggest
interject. I think that's a nice suggestion, Carrie. Thank you.
Okay.
Just a question, is that the only place that we can apply the give to get is the PUD?
The small area plans do that separately as well.
They do, but when we're achieving the give to gets, it's when a developer is coming in and asking for something. It's typically that rezoning. So the PUD is the place where we can make requirements above and beyond, say, a building code standard, where we could require that sustainability. That's where we can require the affordable housing. So I think the PUD ordinance is the big picture general. If there's some easy things like we talk about requiring sidewalks, this is already in the code. But if we're seeing certain things that are easy and everybody should do, we could just amend the site plan requirements. So there might be things that come out of the give to get where we say, well, we should just have that anyway. So it's kind of, I think it's all encompassing under that PUD ordinance.
I have the sense that we might need to call it something else. It has negative connotations, at least within our work group. So that's something I'd put out there, that it maybe needs to be referenced as something else other than give to get.
Yeah, I think within the PUD ordinance, it wouldn't say give to get. It's if you are requesting this PUD, this is what you will do. So we can, yeah, understood.
Carrie, just remind us for the zoning ordinance amendments, was the idea that you bring them to us periodically during our regular meetings, or are we going to have a work session where we conquer several of these at the time, or what was the thought?
Yeah, I would think that, we'll have to think about how we go about this in the future, but being that the list is quite lengthy, we probably should do 3, 4 at a time, or as many as we can take on at a time. Yeah, we'll have to talk about that. Perhaps it's what we found in the past when we've done a lot of zoning ordinance amendment. What we've done with the Planning Commission is work sessions prior to our meetings, where we can really have open discussion about some of this, and then it would then we'd bring it on to our regular agenda, similar to what we do now, where it's just up for discussion as part of your regular agenda. And then we come back with a formal ordinance amendment. So kind of a 3-step process.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes those work sessions are a little bit more conducive to asking questions and having a discussion when you want to kind of dig into like the background of stuff.
Yeah.
So I might be leaning that direction.
I would say, too, if it helps facilitate, it sounds like there's several items that particular people have interest in that, Carrie, you should feel free to potentially we work in pairs on a certain issue and bring it to that work session. So outside of the work session, some work can be done to explore what other cities do, or who are those people individuals in our community that might have a design background, whatever those things might be, to help facilitate you a little bit.
Sure.
All right. And you have the funds available for all of that we just added on. You've checked that box.
That's all staff driven, so.
Okay.
So I'm hearing we'll add to our list of zoning ordinance, the tree ordinance. I didn't sense disagreement in at least looking at it.
Yeah.
Then the PUD ordinance. And I think those are the 2 additions.
So first of all, as I was giving my list, I looked at the list that was in here and I realized, boy, these are a lot of things. And so we're going to have to figure out a prioritization. So, and I can see that some of them might slip to the next year. The other item I had is consideration of, do we distinguish when people come before us that look like this is really preparing the house for sale as opposed to living in it?
Yeah, so so next year we'll bring in the city attorney for our typical kind of I think that's a discussion that we would need to have with him, how far you can go with, because we got to be careful there when we're making decisions based on land value and not the land use.
I think Ian's right, though, and John as well, that we can preface it with a look to providing and supporting affordable housing. Are we doing something or not doing something we could do to encourage and support maintaining the affordable housing in this community? So that's really the impetus for it.
I think that's a great discussion. I'd be happy, and obviously it is the uses that you're focusing on. Are the people building it and they're going to live in it for a while, or are the people building it or just getting the variance and putting a couple of Edina Realty signs up, and, or getting the variance? So, but that sounds great, Carrie. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so next is correspondence and petitions. Chair and member comments. So let's do that. Maybe we're working on the Greater Southdale plan. Carrie, maybe this is a good time. Do you want to just, because I'm still a little confused with these dates, but maybe to make a little announcement of how we are not having an open house on October 11th in case anyone's listening.
Yeah, so the open house for the Greater Southdale area study has been postponed. We won't have that meeting on October 11th. We haven't picked a date specific for when we will have that. It will be sometime in November, maybe mid to late November. But as soon as we zero in on a date, we will start to publicize that and update our master list. That will also likely impact our schedule for Planning Commission public hearing and City Council public hearings on the district plan itself. So based on some of the discussions we heard today, it quite possibly could move into early next year.
Thank you. Are there any other member comments?
I'd say avoid Black Friday in the Southdale area for a day.
50th in France, next public community meeting will be October 23rd, 7 o'clock at the Public Works Building. So we hope to get some great attendance.
Staff comments? Any?
The only update, recent City Council actions. The City Council denied the Pentagon North project. That was the Sienna on the park. They did not meet some of the, most of the conditions that the City Council put on them when coming back for final approval. So the City Council denied that project.
Does that mean now that's terminated with that developer? Wasn't there some time limit they were trying to work with?
Oh, in terms of getting a project done, there was a TIF district established for the north parcel. So yes, that would go away for the north parcel. The south parcel, that was approved. So there's half of that project that will still continue, but the housing piece on the north side of 77th will not happen. The reconstruction of 77th Street, they weren't agreeable to that. The affordable housing policy, they did not, they weren't meeting that, weren't willing to meet that. The council asked them to take a look at that parkway, air quotes, parkway along the north lot line to make that more pedestrian friendly. They didn't really come back with a plan that satisfied that. They were asked to take a look at the entrance into the park off 77th, make that a little more dramatic. As you recall, the entrance to their own project was much more prominent than the park entrance. They didn't really make any changes there. I believe there was a condition about surface stormwater. There weren't changes made there. So those were a few off the top of my head that they didn't meet.
All right. Is there a motion to? Oh, what?
Did the members like to make a motion?
we didn't, we missed them last time. Okay, so do you want to? You can make a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Is there a second?
Is there a second?
All in favor?
Aye.